My name is Clara Hayes, and I'm 29. For as long as I can remember, my family has seen me as little more than a background character in my own life. My brother, Leo, the star lawyer, was the sun around which our entire family orbited. He could never put a foot wrong. As for me, I was the one who poured every ounce of myself into keeping us all afloat, putting my own ambitions on the back burner, constantly striving for a single glance of pride. But it was never enough. For Leo, they had beaming smiles and proud pats on the back. For me, there were only cold looks and words that cut like glass. Why can't you be more like him? Their voices were a constant refrain, slicing right through me, and I took it all. I stayed quiet, holding on to the flimsy hope that someday they would finally see me for who I was. That hope flickered brightest as Leo's wedding approached. I was tasked with making everything perfect, managing every last detail, ensuring a flawless event. I thought, just maybe, this time would be different. This time, they would notice. I was so wrong. The night before the wedding, we were all gathered around the dinner table. Leo started demanding more extravagant bands and imported flowers, things I knew we couldn't afford. I told him no. And that's when my parents turned on me. Their words were a blow I never saw coming. The greatest gift you can give for your brother's wedding is to vanish from this family, forever. The room fell utterly silent. My chest felt like it was being crushed, but I didn't plead. I simply stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out. The click of the door closing behind me was a final, definitive period. The day of the wedding arrived. Everything was set up to be perfect until it all came crashing down in the blink of an eye. If that were you, would you have stayed to watch the fallout, or would you have walked away for good? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your answers. Years before all that, I was a freelance marketer with my sights set high. I had just landed a major contract with a national grocery chain, a $50,000 project to overhaul their regional advertising. It was my golden ticket, a chance to finally achieve financial independence and make a name for myself in a ruthless industry. But then I got the call. Our family's grocery store back in Dayton, Ohio, was on the brink of collapse. The bills were piling up, suppliers were refusing to deliver, and my parents were completely submerged in debt. My mother's voice was thin and cracking over the phone as she begged me to come help. My father, normally a man of few words and even less emotion, admitted they were about to lose everything. I couldn't stand by and let that happen, so I walked away from it all. I called the representative from the grocery chain, officially canceled the contract, and funneled every bit of my energy into saving our family store. I built a marketing plan from the ground up, running ads on local radio stations, stuffing flyers into every mailbox in a 5-mile radius, and even diving into the clunky early days of social media. I spent hours negotiating with vendors, winning back their trust, charming customers, and finding every possible way to cut costs. Within a few months, the results were undeniable. Foot traffic had doubled, the store's revenue was climbing steadily, and we'd paid off the most threatening debts. I spent my nights tweaking ad copy and designing new promotional posters, fueled by the belief that this, finally, would make them see me. But it didn't. One evening, my mother, Helen, and my father, Robert, called a family meeting. I walked in expecting a word of thanks, maybe even a simple nod acknowledging that I'd pulled our family back from the brink. Instead, they announced they were handing over management of the store to my brother, Leo. "He's a lawyer," my mom said, her eyes shining with that familiar, blind pride. "He has the right mind for this." Leo, who hadn't so much as stocked a single shelf. Leo, who had spent all those grueling months comfortably at his law firm, was now being put in charge. My dad just nodded, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "It's for the best," he mumbled. I stood there, completely stunned, the air knocked out of my lungs. Leo just smirked, straightening his expensive tie, already talking about the changes he was going to make to my campaign. "You did okay, Clara," he said, his tone oozing with condescension. "Okay? I had saved their entire legacy. I had thrown away my own future for them. But in their eyes, I was just the temporary fix, the person who patches the holes. My mom went on and on, praising Leo's vision, as if all my hard work had been nothing more than a prelude to his genius. My dad never even looked up from his coffee. I wanted to scream. I wanted to list every sleepless night, every sacrifice, and demand they acknowledge what I'd done, but I didn't. I swallowed the bitter hurt, pasted on a smile, and just kept going. I'd stay late at the store, reorganizing aisles, updating the ads I'd created, doing anything to feel useful. I kept telling myself they'd notice eventually. If I just worked a little harder, if I proved myself a little more, they would have to see my worth. Maybe at the next family dinner, my mom would finally say, "You saved us." Maybe my dad would clap my shoulder instead of Leo's. My best friend since college, Ben Price, saw right through it. We'd meet for drinks and he'd just shake his head as I recounted the latest injustice. "They're completely blind, Clara," he said one night, his fingers wrapped around a beer bottle. "You are running yourself into the ground for people who refuse to see you." I tried to brush it off, but his words lingered. I couldn't give up hope. I couldn't stop trying to earn an ounce of their respect. So I stayed, pouring what was left of myself into their world, clinging to the belief that one day they would finally think I was valuable. The store was flourishing, and it was all because of my work. The aisles were full of customers, the cash registers were always ringing, and our suppliers were back on board. But every single time I walked through those doors, I had to see Leo's nameplate on the manager's office. My parents would call him in to discuss strategy, while I was left in the aisles restocking canned goods. "Good job," my mom said once, her tone distracted, as if I'd just mopped the floor instead of resurrecting their entire business. Leo would breeze in, casually tossing out ideas that I had already implemented weeks before, and my parents would nod in awe, as if he'd just invented fire. I kept waiting for a real thank you. I kept thinking, maybe next time. Maybe if I just did a little more, they'd see me as more than just the other child. So I kept pushing forward, ignoring the constant ache in my chest, hoping for the day they'd finally decide I was enough. Months later, I was drowning in the logistics of my brother's wedding. Leo was engaged to Sophie Carter, and my parents had simply handed me the responsibility of planning the entire affair. They didn't ask if I had the time, and they certainly didn't ask if I had the money. They just expected me to make it happen. I was still trying to rebuild my freelance marketing career, barely scraping by, but I drained my savings account, $12,000 to start paying deposits for the venue, the caterers, everything. I was determined to make it perfect, not really for Leo, but to finally execute something so flawlessly that they'd have no choice but to value it. I spent weeks on the phone with caterers, florists, and photographers, meticulously locking in every single detail. I chose a menu of roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and summer salads that would fit the budget. I met with vendors all over Dayton, haggling to get better prices, triple-checking every contract to make sure there were no hidden clauses. But Leo had grander plans. He didn't just want a wedding, he wanted a coronation. "Get a string quartet from Cincinnati," he demanded one morning over breakfast, barely looking up from his phone, and Sophie saw these rare orchids from overseas in a magazine. "Get those." I tried to gently explain that the budget was already stretched to its breaking point, that my savings were almost gone. He just rolled his eyes. "You're always cutting corners, Clara. Just make it happen." My mom, Helen, chimed in, setting down her coffee mug. "He's right. This is his special day. Don't you dare mess it up." My dad, Robert, just grunted his agreement from behind his newspaper. Their words felt like 1,000 tiny needles, but I pushed on, thinking that a perfect wedding might finally earn me their respect. I worked late into the night, sending emails, adjusting timelines. I found a great local band that was willing to play for a fraction of the cost of the quartet and booked beautiful standard roses instead of the imported orchids. Every decision was a careful balancing act between Leo's fantasies and our financial reality. But he never stopped pushing. One afternoon, he called me, insisting on some celebrity DJ he'd heard about from Cleveland. "It's only a few thousand more," he said, as if that was loose change. I had to remind him that I was personally bankrolling half the wedding. "Figure it out," he snapped before hanging up on me. Helen overheard the call and just shook her head. "Why can't you just do what he asks?" she said, her voice filled with disappointment. Robert glanced up from the TV, muttering, "Don't ruin this for him." I felt completely invisible, like all my effort, all my sacrifice, meant nothing. I had spent countless hours coordinating every detail, putting my own work on hold to bring their vision to life. And yet, every step I took was met with criticism. At a family lunch, Helen found a tiny typo in a draft of the invitation. "Careless," she said, tossing it onto the table. Leo smirked and added, "Typical Clara." I wanted so badly to snap back to tell them just how much weight I was carrying for all of them, but I bit my tongue. I just kept going, tweaking the seating chart, confirming delivery times, hoping that eventually they would see the monumental effort behind the scenes. Ben saw the toll it was taking on me. We met at a coffee shop one evening, and I just unloaded all my frustrations about Leo's endless demands. "He wants a custom ice sculpture now," I said, feeling completely exhausted. Ben leaned forward, his expression serious. "Clara, you are bending over backwards for people who will never appreciate it. You have to stand up for yourself." I just shrugged, stirring my cold coffee. "If I can just pull this off, maybe they'll finally see me." He shook his head, a look of pity in his eyes. "They won't. You are worth so much more than their approval." But I couldn't stop. I kept at it, calling the venue every day, making sure the linens were just right, confirming the cake order. I even paid an extra deposit to secure a backup generator, just in case. My savings were almost gone, but I told myself it would be worth it. If I could just deliver Leo's perfect day, maybe Helen would actually smile at me for once. Maybe Robert would say something other than "don't ruin it." I poured everything I had left into that wedding, believing it was my last chance to finally shine. Leo's demands only got worse. At one point, he texted me a link to a luxury catering service, insisting they had to have a caviar bar. I called him, my voice shaking with stress, and explained that it would completely blow the budget. "You're embarrassing me," he said, his voice ice cold. Helen, who was visiting my apartment, overheard and let out a long, weary sigh. "Just do what he asks, Clara." "It's not that hard." Robert, who was with her, just nodded in agreement without looking up from his phone. Their dismissal was a burning humiliation, but I kept working, rearranging plans, hoping the wedding itself would change how they saw me. The night before the wedding, I was sitting at my family's dining table in Dayton, and the air was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. My mom had made her usual Sunday roast, but nobody was really eating. Leo was leaning back in his chair, lazily scrolling through his phone, while his fiancée, Sophie, just pushed food around her plate. My dad was sipping his wine, his gaze distant. I had dedicated months of my life and poured $12,000 of my own money into this wedding, but something about tonight felt different. It felt like the calm before a hurricane. I just wanted a quiet evening. Of course, Leo was the one to break the silence. "Clara, we need to upgrade the menu," he announced, not even bothering to look up. "Add lobster tails and that vintage champagne from Napa." "Oh, and hire that photographer from Cincinnati, the one who did the mayor's gala." I just stared at him, my fork hovering over my plate. Lobster tails, champagne that cost $600 a bottle, a photographer who charged $4,000 a day. I had already stretched my finances to their absolute limit to cover half the wedding costs. "Leo, I can't," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I've already paid for everything. The venue, the band, the flowers. There is literally no money left." He scoffed, tossing his phone onto the table with a clatter. "You're always so cheap, Clara." "This is my wedding. Make it happen." Helen set her wine glass down with a sharp rap, her eyes narrowing at me. "He's right," she said, her voice steely. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Why are you being so selfish?" Robert finally looked up, his voice gruff. "Don't you ruin this for your brother." My chest constricted. Their words cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I had given them everything, my time, my money, my energy, and I was still the problem. I tried one last time to make them understand. I have spent $12,000 of my own savings. The budget is maxed out. Lobster and a celebrity photographer are not possible. Leo just rolled his eyes and turned to Sophie. "See? I told you she'd skimp on us." Sophie remained silent, refusing to meet my gaze. Helen folded her arms across her chest, her voice like ice. "You have always been like this, Clara. Never willing to step up when it really matters." Robert nodded. "Leo deserves better than your half-hearted effort." Half-hearted? I had worked through the night, haggled with every vendor, and made their dream wedding a reality. But to them, it was nothing. My own voice started to rise, fueled by years of frustration. "I have paid for half of this wedding. I have done everything you asked of me. I cannot just keep throwing money I don't have at this." Leo just smirked and shook his head. "Then maybe you shouldn't be involved at all," he said coolly. Helen leaned forward then, her eyes completely cold. "You know what, Clara? The greatest gift for your brother's wedding is you vanishing from this family, forever." The room went dead silent. Robert didn't even flinch. He just stared down at his plate. Sophie shifted uncomfortably in her chair but said nothing. My heart was pounding in my ears, their words echoing like a physical slap. Vanish. After everything. I wanted to scream, to list every single sacrifice I had ever made for them. But looking at their faces, Helen's cold glare, Robert's blank indifference, Leo's smug little grin, I knew it would be pointless. They had chosen him. They would always choose him. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Fine," I said, my voice low but firm, "if that's what you want." I grabbed my purse from the counter, the jangling of my keys sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Don't make a scene, Clara," Helen called after me, but I was done listening. I walked straight out the front door, and it slammed shut behind me, the sound sharp and utterly final. Outside, the cold night air hit my face, but inside, a fire was raging. I had given them everything I had, my savings, my time, my hope, and they had thrown it back in my face. Sitting in my car, I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. They wanted me gone, fine. But I wasn't just going to fade away quietly. I had spent months building their perfect day, only to be told I was the problem. No more. I wasn't sure what my next move was, but one thing was crystal clear. I was done being their doormat. I started the engine, my resolve hardening into steel. Tomorrow, they were going to find out what happens when I finally stop carrying their weight. The next morning, I woke up with their words still ringing in my ears like a shrill alarm. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone, the app for my savings account open on the screen. $12,000. My entire nest egg, all of it tied up in deposits for Leo's wedding. The caterers, the florists, the band, all paid for out of my own pocket to make their day perfect. But last night's ultimatum, their demand that I vanish forever, had changed everything. I was not going to let them walk all over me. Not anymore. I started making calls. The caterer was first. "Cancel the order," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I'm pulling the deposit." The woman on the other end of the line hesitated, mentioning penalty fees, but I didn't care. Next, the florist. "No roses, no centerpieces," I told her. "Refund my payment immediately." The band was the last call. They'd already cashed my check, but I initiated a chargeback with my bank. By noon, I had clawed back most of my $12,000, leaving the wedding a hollowed-out shell. No food, no flowers, no music. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt, only a cold, hard resolve. They wanted me out of their lives. I was going to give them a wedding they would never, ever forget. By the afternoon, absolute chaos had descended upon the venue. Guests started arriving to find empty tables, a silent stage, and no floral arrangements in sight. Sophie, Leo's fiancée, was just standing there in her expensive gown, completely stunned, as relatives whispered and pointed in confusion. Leo was red-faced, screaming at the venue staff who could only shrug, having no answers for him. Helen called me, her voice a shrill shriek in my voicemail. "Clara, what have you done? You've ruined everything." Robert left a message too, his tone frigid. "You are a disgrace to this family." I didn't call them back. Their accusations bounced right off me. I'd heard enough. That evening, Leo took his anger to an online forum, a local Dayton message board that was already buzzing with gossip. "My sister sabotaged my wedding," he wrote, his post dripping with self-pity and venom. "She's jealous, spiteful, and ruined the best day of my life." He painted me as the ultimate villain, claiming I had deliberately destroyed his big moment out of pure malice. The comments started piling up, some from neighbors I'd known my whole life, calling me selfish and unhinged. Helen even chimed in, replying directly to Leo's post. "She has always been trouble." Robert didn't post anything himself, but I knew he was standing right behind them, nodding in agreement. Their lies spread like a virus, twisting the narrative to make them the victims. I sat in my small apartment, reading their words, a knot tightening in my stomach. A part of me wanted to fight back, to post my own side of the story and expose how I had funded half of their dream wedding, how they had pushed me until I broke. But what good would it do? They would never admit they were wrong. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments in Boulder, Colorado. I had visited once years ago and fallen in love with the quiet majesty of the mountains and the promise of a fresh start. Dayton held nothing for me now but a family that saw me as disposable. I made a call to a realtor to ask about rental properties. "Something small," I said. "I'm starting over." Ben stopped by that night, his face grim. "They're trashing you online," he said, showing me Leo's post on his phone. "Are you okay?" I just nodded, even though my hands were shaking. "I'm done with them, Ben," I told him. He didn't push for more details. He just sat with me in silence as I started packing a few boxes with clothes, books, and my laptop. "You're stronger than they know," he said before he left. His words were a small anchor in the middle of the storm. By midnight, I had booked a one-way bus ticket to Boulder for the following week. The wedding's collapse was on them. They had pushed me too far. Helen's voicemail played again in my mind, her voice blaming me for their public humiliation. Robert's cold tone echoed, labeling me a disgrace. Leo's post, with all its lies, stung the most. But I wasn't going to stay and fight their story. I had given them my money, my effort, and my hope, and they had thrown it all away. Now I was finally choosing myself. Weeks after the chaos, I stood in my small office in Dayton, packing the last of my things into boxes. I'd managed to build a modest freelance marketing business over the years, a side hustle that brought in just enough to stay afloat. It wasn't much. Just a rented room with a desk, a computer, and a handful of client files. But it was mine, and I had decided to sell it. A local agency made me an offer of $30,000 for my client list and existing contracts. I signed the papers without a moment's hesitation, the pen feeling steady in my hand. That money, combined with the $12,000 I'd reclaimed from the wedding, was my escape fund. I also made a much harder call. For years, I had poured myself into the family grocery store, first with the marketing campaign that saved it from bankruptcy, and then with a $7,000 investment from my own savings to keep it running. I had managed the inventory, negotiated with suppliers, and balanced the books. But after their ultimate betrayal, I was done. I contacted my bank and withdrew my investment, every last cent. I didn't bother calling Helen or Robert to warn them. They had made their choice when they told me to vanish. Without my money and my hands-on management, I knew the cracks in the business, the ones I had been patching over for years, would soon split wide open. By the end of the month, I was on a bus heading west to Boulder, Colorado. All my worldly possessions fit into 2 suitcases: clothes, a laptop, and a few favorite books. The mountains grew larger outside the window, their quiet strength seeming to pull me forward. I had rented a small apartment in the heart of downtown. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom with a clear view of the Flatirons. That first night, I sat on the bare floor, eating takeout from a carton, and felt lighter than I had in years. Dayton was behind me. Helen, Robert, Leo, and all their venom were behind me, too. The family store didn't survive long after my departure. Ben sent me occasional updates in blunt text messages. Suppliers had stopped their deliveries when payments became late. The number of customers dwindled as the shelves grew barer. Leo, who had been handed the reins with such fanfare, fumbled every single decision. Helen tried to step in, but she had no idea how to handle the complex logistics I had managed effortlessly. Robert simply retreated, blaming everyone but himself. Within a couple of months, the store declared bankruptcy, and its doors were locked for good. Ben wrote, "They're completely falling apart without you." I didn't reply. Their failure was not my burden to carry anymore. In Boulder, I started from scratch. I began taking small freelance marketing jobs, little gigs for local shops, crafting ads for artisanal coffee roasters and small boutiques. The work was steady, and my skills, honed by years of hustling, were sharp. I kept to myself at first, wary of letting new people in, but the city's inherent warmth slowly began to draw me out. One morning, I wandered into a downtown bakery, pulled in by the incredible smell of fresh bread. The owner, a woman named Martha Jenkins, greeted me with a huge smile. She was in her 50s, her apron perpetually dusted with flour, and her laugh was loud enough to fill the entire shop. "You look new around here," she said, sliding a complimentary scone across the counter. We started talking. I told her I had just moved, leaving out the messy details of why. Martha didn't pry, she just shared her own stories of how she had opened the bakery after a difficult divorce, rebuilding her life from the ground up. "Takes guts to start over," she said, her eyes full of a kindness I wasn't used to. She invited me to a local business owners meetup, where she introduced me to several shop owners who desperately needed marketing help. I landed 2 new clients that week, all thanks to her. Martha became a regular part of my days. We'd have coffee at her bakery, talking about life, and her steady, uncomplicated presence helped ground me. I never heard from Helen or Robert. Leo sent a single furious email, accusing me of deliberately tanking the family business. "You're so selfish," he wrote, as if I hadn't been the one to keep it alive for years. I deleted it without a second thought. Sophie, his ex-fiancée, remained silent, likely caught in the wreckage of Leo's collapsed world. I thought about what Ben had told me back in Dayton. "You're stronger than they know." He was right. In Boulder, I wasn't the shadow I had been back home. I was building something new: clients, connections, a life that was truly my own. One evening, Martha invited me to her bakery after she had closed for the day. We sat with big mugs of tea, the lingering smell of cinnamon rolls hanging in the air. "You seem different," she said, settling in. I nodded, realizing with a jolt that I hadn't thought about Dayton in days. For the first time, I felt completely unburdened, like I could finally breathe without the weight of their expectations on my shoulders. Boulder was my fresh start, and with Martha's support, I was finally finding my own place in the world. I wasn't looking back. Months turned into a year, and Boulder had become my sanctuary, though the aftershocks from Dayton still occasionally reached me. The family grocery store, once the center of my parents' universe, was gone. Its shuttered windows were a permanent symbol of their unraveling. Helen and Robert were facing a stark new reality. Their savings were gone, forcing them to sell the family house and move into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Dayton. Neighbors who once greeted them with warm smiles now avoided their gaze, their family's reputation permanently tarnished by the store's public failure. Leo wasn't doing any better. His natural charm, which had once been enough to win him favors, couldn't mask his incompetence. He'd lost his prestigious law job and was now working at a hardware store, where customers whispered about his role in his family's downfall. His arrogance no longer carried any weight. Sophie, his former fiancée, had quietly dissolved their engagement and moved on, leaving him to face the consequences alone. The life they had all built on my silent sacrifices had crumbled to dust. I tried not to dwell on their struggles. Boulder was my entire focus, a place where I was rebuilding my life, free from their shadows. My freelance marketing business was flourishing. I had secured long-term contracts with 5 local businesses: a popular brewery, a bookstore, an art gallery, a cafe, and a hiking gear outfitter. My days were full and rewarding, spent designing logos, writing ad copy, and pitching new campaigns over coffee in bustling downtown shops. My income was steady, enough for my modest apartment, groceries, and even occasional splurges like a concert ticket or a new pair of hiking boots. Every completed project felt like another brick in the foundation of the life I was building for myself. Ben remained a constant, steady presence, even from miles away. He'd call every few weeks, his voice a warm and familiar sound. "Dayton's not the same without you," he said once, before laughing. "But man, you are killing it out there." He'd send me pictures of his latest woodworking projects, small tokens of a friendship that had survived the fire. His unwavering encouragement was a constant reminder of the strength I had forgotten I possessed. But Martha, the bakery owner, was my true anchor in Boulder. Her shop, with its cozy wooden tables and the ever-present scent of fresh pastries, became my unofficial office, the place where I would brainstorm new ideas or simply unwind after a long day. She'd often slip me a free muffin saying it was fuel for the grind. Her belief in me was so simple and unwavering, and it helped me finally see myself as more than the daughter who had never been good enough. Then, one crisp autumn morning, Helen's letter arrived. Her handwriting was shaky and unfamiliar on the envelope. In it, she claimed she had been diagnosed with a serious illness and was begging me to come back to Dayton to help her and Robert get back on their feet. The words were heavy with manipulation, painting me as the prodigal daughter, the only key to their salvation. I read it twice, a tight knot forming in my stomach. Martha, who was wiping down her counter, saw the look on my face and asked what was wrong. I just handed her the letter. She scanned it quickly, her brow furrowed in disapproval. "This smells like a trap," she said bluntly, tossing it onto the counter. "People like that don't change overnight." Her directness sliced right through my flicker of doubt. I had seen Helen use pity as a weapon my entire life. When I called Ben, he confirmed my fears. "She's trying to drag you back into the mess, Clara," he warned. "Don't you fall for it." I didn't. I wrote a single reply, the words short and final. "I wish you well, but I am not coming back." I mailed the letter and then blocked their numbers on my phone. Cutting them off completely wasn't easy. A small, wounded part of me still ached for the family I had always wanted them to be. But I knew, deep down, that staying tethered to their chaos would only destroy the peace I had worked so hard to find. Martha just nodded when I told her what I'd done, her eyes filled with pride. "You're choosing you," she said, pouring me a fresh cup of coffee, "and that's the hardest, bravest thing there is." Ben echoed her sentiment on our next call. "You're free now," he said, "and don't ever look back." Their support, so steady and real, gave me the courage to finally let go. Here in Boulder, I was building so much more than a career. I joined a local hiking group, and on weekends, I trekked trails in the Indian Peaks wilderness, where the mountains stretched out before me, endless and wild. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago in Dayton, filling sketchbooks with watercolor landscapes of my new home. My apartment had transformed into a real home, with plants on the windowsill, a colorful rug from a local market, and a shelf full of books I finally had the time to read. I landed a huge contract with a regional tourism board, a 6-month campaign that doubled my income. The work was demanding, but every late night spent tweaking slogans felt like a confirmation of my own worth, earned on my own terms. One evening, I was sitting at Martha's Bakery with her and a few of her regulars, laughing about some of Boulder's quirky local festivals. A client of mine stopped by just to thank me for a recent campaign that had dramatically boosted his shop's foot traffic. As he left, I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I had never known back in Dayton. The lesson was finally sinking in. My value wasn't tied to what I could do for Helen, Robert, or Leo. It was here, in the life I was creating for myself. In the clients who trusted my work, in the friends who lifted me up, and in the quiet, peaceful moments where I finally felt whole. Boulder wasn't just a fresh start. It was the place where I learned how to stand tall, not for anyone else's approval, but entirely for myself. The end of the story.